For issue number 3 of Brick Something, we're looking at all sorts of Skeletors from all across the Masterverse. If this is your first issue, I started Brick Something 3 weeks ago by looking at King Grayskull, the first known champion of Eternia to wield the Power Sword. Last issue, we fast-forwarded through Eternian history to a variant of He-Man from the new Eternia universe. So this week, it's high time we explored the other side of the Eternian dialectical struggle. Today, let's shift our attention from the heroes to the villains. Let's talk Skeletor. Skeletor was the very first Masters of the Universe figure I ever got back in 1982. I have a vague memory of my brother coming home with He-Man and falling in love with both the toy and the world in the minicomic. So soon enough, I ended up with this guy. This is a no-brainer character. A yellow-green hooded skull with blue skin and 3 toes and a ram head staff?
Game over.
Instantly sold for life. Note that this was before the Filmation cartoon. All we had at the time were the cross-cell art and mini-comics. This was the version of Skeletor that was etched in my brain. The one that came to life every time I'd play with my old Skeletor figure. And frankly, I've been straight chasing this in-my-brain Skeletor ever since I started collecting Masterverse. And as I'm about to break down, this last year and a half of collecting and customizing Masterverse Skeletor figures has been all about merging my headcanon with all the great MOTU lore we've gotten over the last, 4 decades? Which really is perfect, because that's what this whole Masterverse thing's supposed to be about, spanning the entire multiverse of Masters of the Universe. Alright, so let's do a sort of Skeletor 101. Super quick rundown of 40 years in about 101 seconds. So we already covered that it all started here and here. Then for a while it was here, and it sort of stayed here. That's when we sort of passed by here and did a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Then the absolute geniuses at Canon, the same ones who graced my childhood with Breakin', the Barbarians, American Ninja, they decided that they needed to make these and these, all things that would sear my retinas and electrify my 11-year-old brain. Then I dropped off, but we were still given this, and this, and this, and then nothing. And from that nothing came this, along with these, and then we did it all over again. And then nothing. But along the way we got glimpses of how wonderful the world could be by the geniuses of the 4 Horsemen, who gave us mythic legions and sparked a creative community all around their MOTU tribute figures. Gave us this guy, which then sparked talented customizers like Nicky Nicole and Nick Dubes Creations, who then said Skeletor could look like this. As I covered in the last issue of Brick Something, we got a true revelation. One worthy of the gods, even. Before the show actually launched on Netflix, the incredible illustrator Mindy Lee gave us a glimpse into Revelation Skeletor's past, as written by the fabulous storyteller Tim Sheridan. Together, these two talents told us a story that I won't completely spoil here, but let's just say that we see the triumphs and tragedies that make up Skeletor's life on his homeworld, which puts him in the direct path of a visitor from above. To simplify, before becoming the villain of Eternia, Skeletor ends up working for the evil Horde. He becomes a henchman of Hordak. And he ends up rocking Horde gear. And apparently from this powerhouse animation model sheet, this could have popped up in MOTU Revelation, or if we're lucky, as a flashback in the upcoming next chapter, MOTU Revolution. Either way, the idea of Skeletor as a Horde member just sent my brain to all sorts of places. This'll all be important later when we look at some of the customized Masterverse Skeletors I've put together. So let's look at toys now. First off, here's the original Masterverse Revelation figure. Even before I had the figure in hand, I knew I wouldn't be satisfied displaying this head. Don't get me wrong, Skeletor looks amazing in MOTU Revelation, but this figure didn't do the Powerhouse Animation designs justice. I thought it was just too small and didn't look like the cartoon's artwork. The color of the skull wasn't even right. So even before this figure hit shelves, I was already scouting for a different head. My eyes were drawn to this MOTU Origins set, the Rise of Evil 2-pack featuring Keldor and Cronus. More importantly, featuring a Skeletor head that instantly pulled me back to 6-year-old me and that classic vintage Skeletor in his mini-comic. The head in this set gave me strong vintage Mattel and Alfredo Alcala vibes, and the cape and armor quickly found their way onto my Masterverse Skeletor, becoming the first display-ready version of Skeletor I'd put on my shelf. But I loved Skeletor in Revelation, so I couldn't ignore that wonderful new version just because I had deep nostalgia brain. I wanted to celebrate this new version we had. It took me a while to source the perfect head to do that, but I eventually came across the phenomenal work by Alonso Gutiérrez, who goes by Red Rabbit Customs on Instagram. Please see his work on IG, and all his info is in the video description. He does this amazing thing with magnets to give you 2 different looks for each set. Here you see I have 2 different sets, one with a purple head and the red glowing eyes we traditionally see, and then one with a black hood and more dry, shadowy eyes. The 2 looks will make sense in a little bit, but check out this magnet action. Now check out the amazing details in Alonso's design and sculpt work. Once again, it's important to note that the people making these things, like Alonso, are straight up artists who I'm convinced a few hundred years ago would have been regarded as some of the finest sculptors and artisans in the world. Hyperbolic, maybe, but my point is, in the modern age of mass-produced toys, we can't lose sight of the artistry on display by brilliant so-called customizers like Alonso/Red Rabbit. Respeto por vida. Just respect. So now that I had the purple cowl, I was able to make a Revelation Skeletor for my shelf, and here he is next to Mattel's version. But then being that nerd who actually read the awesome prequel comic, I couldn't get that whole Hordak serving Skeletor out of my brain. That's where the black cowled Red Rabbit custom head comes in. So I got this Horde armor and armbands off of this Masters of the WWE Universe Macho Man figure. Then I made myself an imagined variant of a Traveler Skeletor, maybe a Horde General Skeletor, if you will. I imagine him conquering worlds with the Horde, eventually making his way to Eternia. Now, we can't ignore the amazing new Eternia Skeletor that Masterverse introduced this year. They gave us a warrior Skeletor with facial hair and a cool helmet. I mean, come on now. Like, what do I even say to that? In addition to just being a really cool figure, the new Eternia Skeletor gave me a differently colored Skeletor, one that could be used for yet another Skeletor variant, sorta. For this one, let's turn to the 2000X Mike Young Productions era. Clearly, I love Skeletor, but I especially loved how 2000X fleshed out this idea that Skeletor had a secret past, one hinted at in a vintage mini-comic. So yes, I was on a search for a Keldor for my shelf. Keldor, the blue-skinned half-brother to Randor and uncle to Prince Adam. In the Mike Young show, an assassination attempt goes wrong and Keldor ends up having his face melted off by some sort of acid. The dying Keldor turns to Hordak for magical help, which ultimately results in the creation of the floating, skeleton-headed baddie that would eventually spend most of his life unknowingly fighting He-Man, his disguised nephew. Such an epic chapter in the myth of Skeletor had to live on my shelf. I'm not done with this figure yet, but here's a work in progress. That head from the Origins 2-pack has a sort of skin tone on the face that doesn't quite match up yet with the body. All said and done, my shelf has no shortage of variants of what is easily my favorite Masters of the Universe character, Skeletor. Here's all of them for a final group shot. So that'll end issue number 3 of Brick Something. As I've said before, this wasn't a typical action figure review, so if you're looking for other details about the different Masterverse Skeletors, might I suggest the thorough reviews by the likes of Toy Bro, Toy Habits, Dorkclair, and Pixel Dan. I'll link those in the description. They handle that stuff much better than I do. Speaking of other channels about all things toys, Brick Something is part of the Legion of Lesser Toy Tubers, a group of newer channels like mine who I think you should also get to know. So don't forget to click like for my video and subscribe to Brick Something, and then click this thumbnail to see what's new over at Shiny Plastic People. Thanks again for checking out this 3rd weekly issue of Brick Something. Gracias por ver este video. Salamat sa inyong lahat. And as always, peace and power.